Welcome to the Tanyaacker Show. The New York Times bestseller Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again, has garnered a good deal of praise and acclaim, and it's also garnered a good deal of criticism and provoked the ire of those who think it's unfair to former President Biden. The book is co-authored by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, and Alex is my guest today. We talk about the book and criticisms of the book and his long-standing interest in what presidential fitness means and how the American community has interpreted that concept and decided what it means to be fit as the commander-in-chief. And that's just where we started. We discussed the Trump administration's war on higher education, Iran, the public distrust of the media, and we also talked about Alex's next project. That's just a little taste of what you can expect from our conversation. I know you can't wait for it, so here it is. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to subscribe. Here I am with Alex Thompson. Welcome to the show, Alex. I really appreciate your being here.
I'm so glad to be here.
So let's first start talking about the book, Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again, which you co-authored with Jake Tapper. It has been a critically acclaimed bestseller. You yourself have received numerous accolades, not just for the book, but also for your White House reporting in general. Among other things, you received the Aldo Beckman Award for overall excellence in White House coverage from the White House Correspondents Association. So this book has garnered a lot of praise. It's also raised the ire of a lot of folks who think that it was, or is rather, unfair to President Biden, and that it unfairly singles him out for attention to the exclusion of others who might also deserve examination. What do you say to those critics, and what do you think about this criticism writ large?
I'd say that I think people can walk and chew gum at the same time. That also, just because President Trump is doing X doesn't mean that you should not cover President Biden, his administration, having done Y. And also just part of the reason we did this book, and, Jake Tapper and I, on November 6th, we had done no interviews. Well, that's not true. We did like 5 interviews before November 6th, but we did no interviews. And we had no words written and no book deal. And we just honestly, even if no one read it, we had no book deal either. We were just we just wanted to write it because we felt it was an important tale for history. And if some Democrats and some media reporters and et cetera are like, well, why aren't you focusing on Trump? That's fair. But I'd also say to some of those people, this is also sort of how you got in this position, because when people like myself were covering Joe Biden's decline in 2023 and early 2024 before the debate, that was always the answer. And then obviously it would end up being a political disaster for the Democratic Party.
I would also offer this, take it for whatever it's worth. I think that CNN is often presented, certainly by the president and a lot of his partisans, as a left-leaning outlet, not suggesting that it is. That's a conversation for another day. And I think that there is a perception that with respect to the partisan divide, there's one side that eats its own, and there's another side that lets its own run wild. I mean, what do you think are the chances of someone at Fox News, of Jake Tapper's, the Jake Tapper counterpart at Fox News? What's the likelihood of them writing a book about President Trump, right? I think that there is, or rather, do you think we'd see that? Do you think that that's a possibility? Or do they all just get jobs in the administration?
I mean, I guess it depends if they're a journalist or not. I would say like the people at Fox News. I don't want to go like with the broad brush here, but
Sure.
I would also say that Jake Tapper is a real journalist, and he is not on anyone's side one way or another. Like, go back. There's a GQ profile of Jake Tapper in 2017 when he's being very aggressive on Trump. And he said, like, all the people that are praising me now are going to hate me in like 5 years. And that's what being a journalist is. And if you aren't willing to do that and make people upset when they think you are on their quote unquote team, then you're not a real journalist. I actually think it's like to Jake's credit that despite what some viewers of CNN may think or have thought that he was on their side, he's actually just on the side of like what he thinks is true. And so am I. And if people at Fox News, I sort of agree with you that a lot of the people there would not be willing to write like a tough critical book of Donald Trump or whatever Republican president is there. But I think that just sort of shows that they're more of a commentator and an ideologue and not a journalist.
I think that also goes to your point about how you can walk and chew gum at the same time, because you yourself have said that President Trump's health condition should be more rigorously examined, and it hasn't been. Are you doing that investigative reporting or analysis on his mental or on his health condition? Because he hasn't, as you've said yourself, he's not been entirely transparent about that.
I'm certainly trying. And, I covered it in 2023 when he was running for president, the fact that he basically had released nothing about his health, even though, he's older when he was older when he was inaugurated than Joe Biden was when Joe Biden was inaugurated. He was the oldest president ever inaugurated. And while he released like a bit of a summary, like 2 months ago, I've talked to a number of physicians that still have open questions. So, I think as long as we keep, electing the oldest president ever, which we have done now 3 times in a row, because people forget that Donald Trump, when he was elected the first time, was also the oldest president ever inaugurated in his first term. I'm definitely going to keep investigating it.
Just sort of staying on this topic for a moment and kind of digging in a little bit. There's some other things I want to talk about with you, but just digging into the book a little bit. One of the points that you've raised, and that sort of became a big issue, is that the vast majority of President Biden's public events were on weekdays between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Why is that important? Because you and I both know that a lot of work that presidents do doesn't take place in public. So what's the significance of you only see him Monday through Friday between 10 and 4?
Well, because the reasoning behind that was not about a media strategy. The reasoning behind it, and it may have actually started that way. The reasoning behind that was actually because he had limitations and because he was at his best between those hours. And we also obtained months and months of internal schedules in 2023 and 2024 that showed his private schedule was also often limited to those hours. Listen, and someone put this, a senior member of the administration put it to me this way. He was an old man. And like a lot of old people, we've all seen it in our own personal lives. They got good days and bad days. They also have good hours and bad hours. And Joe Biden also had good hours and bad hours, and increasingly both the public and private schedule in ways that I think actually began sort of an earnest way of just like putting him out there at his best, began to resemble something more of a cover-up when his bad hours became worse.
And I would say that both to your and to Jake Tapper's credit, one of the indictments is not just about those close to the president, those close to President Biden who may have covered things up, but it's also, there's a big criticism of the media here and how the media didn't ask a lot of the questions that folks thought that it should. Can you talk a little bit about that, if you would?
Complicated. People like to sort of think of it as one big entity. I would say there are a few things going on, in particular, like the DC White House media. One is, I think like some people let their own ideological leanings affect how they covered Joe Biden. And it's not a secret that, at least in the Joe Biden White House, like a lot of the White House media skewed liberal. I also think there's a bit of like a DC groupthink that goes beyond ideology and goes into just like social nicety, where it's, you saw this during the Iraq War as well. And, when all of your colleagues are doing one thing, stepping out on the limb, you're like sort of looking around. And I do think there was a bit of that here as well. I also think, in the end, the White House was also not telling the truth. And it was following a White House that often didn't tell the truth, and the Trump White House. And as a result, I think some reporters gave the Biden White House too much of the benefit of the doubt and did not remember that every White House lies. They lie about different things. They don't always lie to the same extent, but every White House lies.
You've been a political reporter for some time, and you followed some of these trends. So given that, and given the point you made about President Trump, he was just the oldest person ever inaugurated to be president of these United States. Why aren't people asking the same questions? I mean, I think you get, there are hints of that, right? Like we heard that as of May, he'd only had 12 security briefings. It's been reported that he doesn't read the intelligence briefing book, certainly not regularly. Is there a reason why there's so much attention on Biden's age and not really very much attention on President Trump's age and what that may mean? Because, to your point, sometimes people get older. They don't feel like doing all the stuff that they felt like doing 20 years ago. And being president is a very big job. So why do you think that more folks have been, it seems like they're reluctant to address the issue with respect to this president?
I say a few things. I think age is a difficult thing to report on, in part because, anyone that's had a an elderly relative, it can be difficult. It's like, are they the same or are they not? I'd also say a lot of the same criticisms of Trump, you could have also made the exact same criticisms in 2017. In fact, many people did. Jake Tapper often has this line where it's like, are we sure this is cognitive decline, or is it just like another wing of the hospital? When it comes to Trump, he has often said ridiculous, untrue, wild things that attract the media. And is this new or is this something different? There have been a few verbal slips that I paid attention to and have actually and have covered, including him. He mixed up Nissan and Nippon. There are two different companies in Japan. He's also said I didn't sign some. He said I didn't sign something, but then he actually had signed an executive order or a proclamation of some sort, and so. There are some open questions about his age. I do think the reason why it may not be receiving as much attention, also, honestly, is because Donald Trump is so much more accessible than Joe Biden. Joe Biden was hidden from the media in many ways, had very, very few events. Donald Trump basically talks to the media all the time. So I do also think that adds an extra layer. But I think the question is 100% relevant. And it's a story I'm going to continue to follow for the next, 3.5 years.
I have a theory. Tell me what you think about this. I think part of the reason there's less reporting on it is that he doesn't care. And a lot of his partisans don't care. And I think that the media has been so demonized by a lot of his partisans that folks, I don't know, I feel like they're reluctant to take on the fight. Do you think I'm wrong?
The again, like, I'm gonna defend, like, the media is a monolith. I don't agree. As I'm sure there are some reporters that do fall in that category or in that critique that you suggested. But I think there's been a lot of, like, really, really aggressive reporting on President Trump in lots of ways from many reporters. So yeah, I don't completely agree with that critique, at least in the media at large.
That's fair. That's fair. I think that we do often talk about the media like it's just this one big entity. But the media includes CNN, Newsmax, MSNBC. So there are all sorts of different folks with different motivations who are who are in that space. You, though, also, to be fair, like, this issue of presidential fitness is not something that you just happened upon when people started talking about Joe Biden's age. I mean, I think it was about 10 years ago, you had this really interesting piece in Politico. Would America elect a mentally ill president? I might be paraphrasing the title, but in that piece, you talk about how we've had a long history of presidents who've had various issues, but people just kind of tiptoed around it. I mean, you said just a few minutes ago that there's sort of this issue of political nicety where people don't feel like they can cross some lines. But presidents who have had issues, be they mental, physical, or the like, that's not new. I think what's new is that we're really starting to engage and confront them about that. Talk a little bit about that piece that you wrote in Politico about a decade ago.
You do your research, because I've done a few events for this book tour and nobody has brought this up. And I do think it's completely related to this story. It just happened. It was a big magazine piece, like 5,000 words. And essentially, like, we have had presidents concealing their health for as long as the Republic. Now, that piece was focused on the mental health of presidents. So to give you a little bit of an idea, as soon as there were, psychotropic drugs available, presidents have been using them. Nixon took a bunch. JFK was taking antipsychotic meds in low doses, which could be used for, like, anti-anxiety, in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And lawmakers across the board have been taking these drugs, and some also weren't taking the drugs, but probably should have been. And like, LBJ 100% would have benefited from taking some of these drugs. But the reason some of them weren't was because they were scared people were going to find out. And the reason why some people were and not sharing it was because they were also scared of people finding out. And it's because health can be weaponized in politics. And as a result, people hide their health, which may be a good political strategy, but it is not necessarily good for the country. And it's not necessarily good for the voters. And it's not also honest for the people that are electing them. And the truth is that, beginning with George Washington, presidents hide their health, even if it impedes their ability to do their job. In more recent history, Woodrow Wilson was basically not equipped to do the duties of the presidency for the last year and a half of his presidency. FDR had no business running for re-election in 1944 in the middle of World War II, given his health. And, honestly, America's lucky that something worse did not happen as a result of that. JFK lied about having Addison's disease. We still don't know the truth about Ronald Reagan at the very end of his presidency. And we still don't know the full facts of Joe Biden. And so another reason why we wrote this book is because presidents are never going to willingly and voluntarily be candid about their health. I think history has showed that. And it would take some sort of reform, Congress, whatever, to change that, because it affects all of us if you don't have a president that is fully capable of doing his duties.
The Roosevelt example is interesting because certainly there was a point toward the end of his presidency and the end of his life where he became, where he was quite ill. But even before that, before the time when his health really took a turn for the worst, and he was paralyzed as a result of the polio, he took great pains to conceal that from America. I mean, just being in a wheelchair. So this notion that, I think you touch on something important, and I think that your article touches on something important because it really causes us to think about what are the things that symbolize strength and power, and who makes you feel safe. And if you hear that the president is on antidepressants, maybe that makes people think twice. Not saying that that's valid, but maybe it just is what it is, right? Like, without any judgment, there's no question that I think the American public would not react well to getting a whole list of medications that their leader is on, especially when that leader's got his or her hands, so far only his, hands on the nuclear codes, right?
I mean, this is why people conceal their health. But also, I think you're touching also on an important question about like the stigma that comes with, just physical disabilities with regards to FDR, but also mental health too. I think it's fair to argue that one of the most depressed or people that experienced like severe depression in American history was Abraham Lincoln. To an extraordinary extent, you read his own writings, his own letters. This is one of the men, I think it's fair to say, that has experienced clinical depression in American political history and is widely regarded as one of the best American presidents. And if he had been honest and candid about that at the time, it would have hurt him. But I do think that should make us think and rehabilitate or just like recalibrate what we think is disqualifying and what is, a problematic political problem. Just because someone's been through a significant medical episode, physical or mental, and continues to, doesn't necessarily mean that they would be a bad president, FDR included, who was in a wheelchair his entire presidency.
Shifting gears a little bit, but sort of staying on the topic of current events involving this administration, you are a Harvard alum. What do you think about the current conflict between Harvard and the president, and even more broadly, sort of the conflict between this administration and so many institutions of higher learning? We just saw that the head of, I think it was UVA resigned, or was it? I think it was UVA resigned over some attacks over his DEI initiatives. First, talk about Harvard, since you're an alum, and I know the Crimson to be quite loyal. But more broadly, what do you think about this battle between the Trump administration and so many institutions of higher education?
I think the Harvard battle is much more symbolic than it will have a realistic impact, in part because Harvard has the resources to fight back. I think that the Trump administration is fighting Harvard as a symbol to all the other places, all the other colleges in the country. If we're going to take on Harvard, like Harvard probably has the resources to fight back. A lot of these other colleges don't have the resources to fight back. They don't have, 10,000, or I don't know how much a lawyer would cost, but like they don't have like the lawyers to fight back against what the Trump administration is doing. And I think it's about trying to send a message to all of the colleges in the country that if you don't abide by what we're doing, we're also going to come after you. And that also fits into what you asked about, like UVA and all these other colleges. Like the Trump administration is trying, you can say like they have critiques about what college you're teaching, whatever else. But the truth is they want to change how colleges teach Americans. And they are doing that by, threatening their funding.
What do you think they want to change? I mean, specifically, if this is a bit speculative, but based on your analysis and research and reporting, if this administration could like wave a magic wand and say, now you are going to do this, what is this? What is the thing that they want to accomplish?
The administration would characterize all of it under a very broad DEI umbrella, diversity, equity, inclusion. But that would actually mean, a framing of history that can be very critical of how this country has handled, especially Black Americans, but also like people of color generally. They certainly have made clear they want a more rah version of American history taught. They think that a version of American history that they think undermines patriotism should not necessarily be taught, especially if it's getting American tax dollars. And so I think that is like at least one key bit. They want sort of a much more, in their minds, rah version.
It feels really strange to me, because I think about that, and I think about the fact that part of what makes America a special place is that you've had people show up and change things for the better. So if you're trying to sanitize it all, what do you say about Martin Luther King? Oh, he just showed up and he led these protests because he was having a bad day or they didn't get his lunch right. I mean, I don't know how you really tell the story of America without telling the stories of people who changed things. If you're going to tell the story of change, you got to tell the story of what came before. Let's move to Iran. I'm so happy that you're here. I feel like we can talk about everything. What is your assessment of the effectiveness of the strikes on Fordo? Do you think that we accomplished what we set out to accomplish, or did the Iranians just move things somewhere else?
Truly, I don't think we know yet. And it's going to be interesting to see. I think that the bigger question, whether or not the strikes were effective, is what does Iran do in retaliation, if anything? At the moment, doesn't look like anything significant. But, that was always the risk by doing this. This is why previous presidents didn't do what President Trump did, is because you don't necessarily, especially in the aftermath of the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, you didn't necessarily want to risk a situation in which you would have to send more troops and planes and bombs to Iran. And if you look at like American history, like going from 0 to 100 in a war happens a lot. You can look at World War II and Lusitania. You can look at World War I, Lusitania. You can look at World War II and Pearl Harbor. There are things you can do to amplify, and then all of a sudden it becomes a much bigger conflict. And so I don't think we know how this is going to play out yet.
So first off, I want to say it is so refreshing to hear someone say, we just don't know, instead of sort of positing things that may support one side or another. Clearly, there are some things that have to play out. In terms of the timing of these strikes, though, and when you compare the situation in which President Trump found himself as compared to where prior administrations were, because nobody, I mean, not Biden, not Obama, not Trump version 1. Nobody was like, yay, it's okay if Iran has a nuclear weapon. I think that every president, certainly every president of every party, of every administration, has been in that position. But now this was probably, I mean, if there's good timing for something, I mean, it was a moment where I think Hezbollah has been if not neutered. I think that's going too far. They certainly aren't the force that they might have been a little while ago. Israel was effective, I think, in taking out what might have been some of the effectiveness of Iran's response. So was this the best, like, if you're going to go in, was this, as you see it, probably the best time to go in as compared to earlier moments?
I mean, certainly Donald Trump thought so, because Donald Trump resisted doing this in the first term. Now, he did order assassination of Soleimani, and Iran, one of the top military leaders. I do think that Israel, in response to Hamas's attacks on October 7th, have certainly weakened some of Iran's proxies across the region. I don't know. You say you praise. I don't know if that's the real reason that Donald Trump finally decided to say yes, but certainly it is a factor in the broader political context.
You have also made some sort of really interesting observations about democratic politics, big D, democratic politics in America. And you've said that the Democratic Party is presently facing an identity crisis. And, you know, we can certainly see some of that with the mayoral upset in New York, which I think surprised a lot of folks. But Democrats have always had this very big tent, right? And there's always been a bit of a struggle between the more left-leaning and liberal wing of the party and the moderates. I mean, even when Bill Clinton was president, we saw that. What do you think makes today and this moment different?
Both parties always have, especially when you have a country in which there are only two parties, both parties always have a split between their moderate and their more like, right wing or left wing divisions. So that is not new. What those divisions care about is new. And also how angry and how frustrated those wings and those bases also changes with time. So it's interesting, in 1992, the Democratic Party was really frustrated after having lost 3 presidential elections in a row, Reagan, and then H.W. Bush. Now, it is a little bit different because the country lost in 2016, or not the country, but the Democratic Party lost in 2016, narrowly won in 2020, and then lost again in 2024. And you have a left wing of the party that believes that they lost because the center, the establishment part of the party, basically rigged the primary to prop up centrists and Hillary Clinton, and then Joe Biden, and you have a center of the party that believes that the reason why the party lost is because of activists that are that are pushing the party to the left in reaction to their opposition to Trump. And so it is not nearly as clear cut, I think, as some of the past battles. And I think it's actually going to be a fascinating story over the next year and a half and the next 3.5 years through the next presidential election.
You've talked, or rather written, about the rise of populism. And we've really seen that in the Republican Party, right? Like, this is not George W. Bush's Republican Party. This is not Ronald Reagan's Republican Party. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party. And that movement, the MAGA movement, really is, whatever else you can say about it. One of the things that it is a populist movement. Democrats are, I think, having to engage more strongly, or rather, they're really being, I think, put in a position now where they've got to engage with their populist, with the populist wing of that party. Do you think that there is sort of this new kind of cross-party populist movement that is on the rise in the country? People aren't really identifying with the Democratic leadership, such as it is, or necessarily with Republicans, such as they were, but they're identifying with something else that seems of the common person. Is that what's going on here?
I think the word populism, basically, in some ways in media, doesn't mean anything anymore because it's so used and, in my opinion, overused.
Yep.
What I think, though, is that there is a deep anger across this country for different reasons. And there is a denial in DC and in New York and in elite circles of both parties about the depth of that anger. And there are politicians that have come along, whether or not it's Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders or other people, that have spoken to that anger. And the establishment circles have basically been, tried to oppose it until it was overtaken by it. But it's complicated. And to be clear, I don't mean to equate Bernie and Donald Trump. They were obviously completely opposed. But I do think both of them speak to an anger among voters that people in DC and New York just aren't speaking to or completely recognizing.
Do you think that the term elite is as overused as is the term populism? Because I agree with
yes,
you. Yes,
100%. I felt even guilty saying it because it's 100% true. Yes, completely agree.
Like, I don't even know what that means anymore.
I don't know either. I mean, people
means.
that are in charge, people that have powerful positions, people that have more money.
Yeah, but a lot of them now are in those, like, they're in power and they're in charge and they're like, waving their hammers against the elites. But I'm like, y'all are running things.
Oh, well, that's a whole different question. It's like, what happens when, quote unquote, populists get in charge, right?
Quote unquote.
It's a tale as old as time. I mean, like, go back to, you can tell from this interview that I'm like a history buff, but like, go back to, 1930s, Louisiana, once you get in power, there are a lot of populists that don't necessarily act like populists.
Well, listen, Alex Thompson, this has been a lot of fun for me. I just think that the variety of things that I could keep talking about with you could keep you here for much longer than I said I'd keep you. But I really appreciate it. And before you go, what are you working on next? What's the next book?
So I say this because but with the caveat that I do not have a book deal on this, but it's been something I've been it's like the project I have and like the back that I've been working on for a few years in case like I figure it out, which is sort of an irreverent retelling of the Constitutional Convention.
Oh,
because I deeply believe that we have mythologized these figures at the very, very beginning, and it affects our politics now. And the truth is that the Constitutional Convention, in my opinion, and if you look, and I think like it's a history book, it was a mess. It was a shit show. I mean, it was a bunch of people that like a bunch of white guys that were like from different places of the country that had basically wanted all of their own interests protected, and all of the really, really contentious issues, whether or not it was like states' rights versus federal rights, or, you know, how to elect the president, how much power the president elects. What do we do with the, you know, hundreds of thousands of Black people that we kidnapped from Africa and we're enslaving? Like all those like very contentious issues, they punted in the Constitution. And I think we sometimes hold this Constitution as like a reverential scripture, like it's American scripture. And it was an imperfect document at the time, made by like a lot of imperfect people, and the stuff from the Constitutional Convention, like the scenes would like make you laugh out loud. Like I'll give you just one example. Like Benjamin Franklin, who at this point was like semi-senile, couldn't attend the first day. Because he had some sort of medical illness. And on the second day, he was brought in on a chariot that he had brought back from Paris, that was carried by prison labor from the jail across the street from Constitutional Hall. Like, this is like one of many examples of like, this was crazy. And so like an irreverent but true and funny and also earnest history of the Constitutional Convention is the next book I want to write. I don't know if anyone will buy that, but that's the next one I want to write.
I'm rooting for it because I really want to read that book. I mean, I do think that we often assume that this country was founded by people who were all on the same page and had a great vision of America. So there was no. And I'm not even the historian. I think that you are on this issue, but I know enough to know that they all had very different visions of what America should be. And some of them had to be convinced to even be a part of a United States. So I am cheering for that book. I want that book to happen. Somebody give this man a book deal, because I think a lot of folks need to read that. So before you leave, tell us what you think. And again, I know the media is not a monolith. I know that, journalists are all over the place. Some are doing their hard to be fair, irrespective of personal belief. And some are sort of camouflaging their personal and political agendas under the guise of being news people. Americans, I think of both parties, and irrespective of whether or not they even identify with a party, do not have much trust in news and in the news business. How does that change?
I don't have an answer for how that changes. That being, I guess I'll give my sort of gentlemanly dodge here of like what I think would help change that. Which is just because I do think reporting is as important as ever, especially in this moment where like people don't know what's true, and a lot of people in power aren't telling the truth. And I think, showing to be cliche, no fear or favor towards people in power could help. But we are living in very dynamic and fast changing times. I don't necessarily know if that will help in the long run. But I mean, it's part of the reason, I will say, to put in a nakedly shameless plug for Axios, it's part of the reason I'm at Axios, because we believe that when people are confused and don't know what's true, they are still hungry for objective journalism, even when a lot of the financial incentives are towards more partisan angles and the social media incentives are towards more partisan angles. We still think there is, an appetite for, it's not people in the middle as people just want to know what's true. And our hope is that even in this crazy online universe that we're living in, these like, fascinating but disorienting times, that people will still want to know, to have like reliable journalism.
Well, Alex Thompson, I appreciate you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. And I do hope you come back. This was really an interesting conversation for me.
Thank you so much for inviting me.